Our keynote speaker is Professor Tim Whitley. Tim is the Managing Director of Applied Research for BT, and he's also Managing Director of BT's Technologies Campus, Adastral Park in Suffolk. He is accountable for all aspects of BT's global research, and this includes the research, technology and partnerships we have with world-leading universities. So I'm now delighted to hand over to our conference's first keynote speaker, Professor Tim Whitley.
Well, thank you, Fraser, and good morning, everybody. Perhaps I can begin by adding my welcome to you all for joining the Tommy Flowers Network on its first day. As you've just heard, you've got a really cracking lineup of real-world experts in the rest of this morning, and indeed for the rest of this week. And it's my pleasure and privilege to really just sort of give a little bit of context and perspective, more broadly, I think, around the way BT thinks about innovation, the way we think about research, and give you a glimpse of some of the things that we're working on. We've got a really broad audience on this call, a lot of friends and colleagues from the rest of BT, but also, of course, people from academia, and indeed some folk from young folk who are sort of still at that A-level stage and deciding whether or not a career in the STEM-based subjects might be for them. So a really compelling set of audience and a compelling agenda. I want to begin by just giving you a little background as to my career experiences within BT. These are mostly pictures of me you see on the right, not the one at the pole. That's an emblem of what I might have been doing about 39 years ago. I joined BT as a trainee technician apprentice up in North Wales 39 years ago. So that is the sort of thing I would have been doing between the ages of 16 and 19, climbing telegraph poles, going down manholes, hanging around in telephone exchanges and the like. Went off to study physics at university, and then that is a picture of me, I believe, in Ipswich Telephone Exchange, conducting a world first experiment with something called a praseodymium-doped fluoride fibre amplifier. So I spent about 10 years doing applied research in the area of photonics, and then those are pictures of me really indicating the range of amazing people who I have the privilege to meet as I represent BT's R&D activities. And in my role, I'm essentially look after the interface into universities and have the challenge of trying to make sure BT is never caught out by any technology innovation and that we can harness technology for the best. So that's me. I want to set out a little bit about the way BT thinks about innovation and research and this whole process of how you go from new discovery, the sort of amazing things that happens in universities, through to delivering real value for customers and for society in general. And we start that with this sort of provocative statement that purposeful innovation in telecoms has transformed the world since 1837. There's two weird things about that statement. The first is the phrase purposeful innovation, and the second is the weird dates, and I'll just unpick both of those for you now. Purposeful innovation, as we define it at BT, is really simple. It's that fusion of science with real-world engineering to do something useful, something of purpose. Science, of course, is that discovery-led pursuit of new knowledge that happens brilliantly at universities, and you're going to get a glimpse of the very latest of some of that in our sector from some of the speakers later today, when you hear from Andrew Ellis, for example, and later on in the week as you hear from some of our other friends and colleagues from academia. Engineering, of course, is taking that stuff and actually doing it at not just once, but 1,000 times, 100,000 times, and doing it in a safe and a secure way, doing it to a cost point. But the most important point of this triangle is it's got to do something useful. Something useful for customers, and more broadly for society. Purpose. Why the date then, you might ask me? Well, the date is because it allows me to remind BT colleagues and tell those non-BT folk on the call that, of course, BT is descended from the oldest communications company in the world, the Electric Telegraph Company. But if we go, which was 1846, that was founded. But if we go back a bit further, we see a surprising resonance between the origins of BT and the work that the Tommy Flowers Network is doing today. And that's the sense of purposeful innovation. The two characters you see there are an academic, a guy who became professor at King's, a guy called Charles Wheatstone, Professor Sir Charles Wheatstone. He's on the left. as you look at it. And on the right is a chap called William Fothergill Cook. And today we call him an entrepreneur. And these two characters were contemporaries of Michael Faraday. They were getting excited about Michael Faraday's discoveries in electricity and magnetism. And they had this amazing idea, the idea that you could use that phenomena to communicate over distance. On the 12th of June, 1837, they filed a patent. That little piece of paper on the left is the patent they filed. And a year later, they built something called something that was effectively the world's first practical electric telegraph. And you can see that today in the Science Museum. And of course, these two characters essentially gave time to the nation. They allowed communication over distance, which was completely new, and it revolutionized and supercharged the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s. So that is a beautiful example of purposeful innovation. Science combined with entrepreneurship and engineering to do something amazing. And down the years, BT's really tried to pursue that goal. And these are some of the amazing things that BT, with our global telecoms partners, always a vendor of one sort or another, and almost always a university of one sort or another, have actually delivered stuff that has transformed our world. I won't go through all of these, although each one of them is an amazing story of purposeful innovation. But for example, 1926 was the first time a human in North America spoke in real time to a human in Europe. So that's less than 100 years since humanity's been able to do that sort of thing. And that was a wireless transmission experiment between AT&T Bell Labs and Post Office Engineering Research, the forebear of the organization I run today on behalf of BT. World-changing innovation. They launched a service the year later, and it ran for 40 years. 1943, of course, is a very important one, and particularly important in the context of this network, because this is where Tommy Flowers comes in. So in 1943, the fusion of academia was people like Alan Turing, Bill Tutte, Max Newman, brilliant academics of their day, Cambridge University, working alongside Tommy Flowers, a post office engineering researcher. And it was the fusion of that academic brilliance with the engineering and industrial experience that allowed them to do something that neither party could do alone. And that was to create the world's first electronic programmable computer, something called Colossus. Those of you who follow the code story of Alan Turing will be familiar with that story. I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is a day about optics, so I have to mention 1984. 1984 is all about this stuff. This is single-mode optical fiber. This is about half a kilometre's worth of fiber, hair-thin strands of glass, the purest glass humans have ever managed to produce, and of course the very fabric of our modern connected world. 1984 was an important date because that was the date the first commercial single-mode optical fiber system went live anywhere in the world. It's between Milton Keynes and Luton, and it was the product of brilliant work between vendors of the day. Fiber wasn't invented by BT, it was invented by Kao and Hockham. Charles Kao won the Nobel Prize for it. But what BT did in those days of the late 70s, early 80s was to recognize single-mode fiber as the future and put in a lot of the hard miles of engineering to bring it to commercial reality. An amazing milestone on the evolution of communications globally. Skipping on, again, I'll do hardly any of these because of wanting to get on to talk about other stuff, but you will see some of the more recent examples of purposeful innovation coming out of our labs at the moment. You can see something there around quantum key distribution. I'll mention that later, and a very exciting world first that we announced a couple of weeks ago around quantum key distribution, which is a way of securing networks. You'll also see we very proudly point out the first that BT-EE were first to 5G, launching on the EE network last year. The very first 5G massive MIMO antenna to go live anywhere in the UK was at the lab I would love to be hosting you all at, which was at Adastral Park at Martlesham, a key milestone on the road to us getting 5G rolling out across the UK. One of the first deployments anywhere in the world. So that's purposeful innovation. If you're into purposeful innovation and R&D, then you invest. And these are just some of the stats that indicate the degree to which BT is investing. You can see we're the fourth largest investor in R&D of any organization in the UK over the past decade. If you're a lab, one of the things you do is invent, and if you invent things, then you patent things. In other words, you go through that process of proving that you've made an inventive step and putting it out there essentially for review by the patent offices around the world. BT does that. We had one patent in 1837. We've got just over 5,000 now as part of our overall portfolio. And we track our invention rate each year, and we rank third, the third most prodigious filer of patents with the European Patent Office, not just of UK telecoms companies or even UK tech companies, but of all UK businesses. So a pretty decent filing rate, which is a really important way of protecting the services and systems that we launch globally, and therefore ensuring we can deliver those services to our customers on an ongoing basis. So an important element of what we do for BT. If you're a lab, you also want to key into that amazing discovery science that happens around the world. So BT's got relationships with many universities, several of them global, MIT, the India Institute of Science in Bangalore, Tsinghua University in Beijing, but also a lot of universities here in the UK, over 30 direct university relationships, which means that we can key into and benefit from the really healthy higher education sector we have in the UK. The UK is blessed in many ways that our universities rank number 1 or 2 for their discovery science, as measured by global publications in peer-reviewed journals and the citation count. So it's a really healthy ecosystem that BT works with on a very collaborative basis, and a very important part of how we start our applied research journey. This is the place I would love to be welcoming you to the conference. It's where we normally hold these, the 100-acre campus here, just about 10 miles from the coast here in Suffolk. This is the main lab block. And although it started as our lab over 40 odd years ago, over the years it's evolved into much, much more. So these days it's our global engineering headquarters. It's the UK operations centre, 24/7, 365 days a year, running our global networks, which go to more countries and territories than any other operator on the planet. And of course, our UK network, so important for allowing us to keep on doing all the things we want to do in our life. It's also the largest test and integration facility in Europe, which is kind of where we put technology through its paces before launching things into what is these days critical national infrastructure. And on that basis, it's really a national centre for digital communications and innovation. It's a decent number of people there. There's about 2,500 BT folk, about 500 folk working for OpenReach, of course, that legally separate element of the BT family. And very excitingly, over the last decade, we welcomed in about 1,000 non-BT folk working for over 150 other high-tech companies, large and small. And as I say, in normal times, it would be a place where we would be convening with customers, helping BT close deals, convening with stakeholders, policymakers, ministers of state, etc. At decent volume, about 60,000 non-BT visitors would come through the park each year. And very importantly, and very pleasingly, getting on for 10,000 of that footfall would be young people, school children from primary age right through to A-level age, really interested in technology and digital technology in particular, and how it can help address many of the challenges we face in our modern world. That would be Adastral Park. So afraid we can't take you there today, but maybe when we can get back to living our lives in a more normal way, many of you will have an opportunity to visit. I want to pivot now and just sort of talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we in the industry face and that BT face. And I begin with this one. It's the relentless pace of change. And I want to illustrate that in a few ways. This is a chart that those of you who are sort of nearer my age will probably have a drawer full of devices that look pretty much like this, and will now be recognizing good old device friends from years gone by. The younger of you will be like my young daughters, looking at these thinking these are out of the ark. But of course, it is a relatively short period of time that we have gone through these devices. This is 35 years or so of evolution in mobile device technology, evolving from the surprise and wonder of the early car phones, which were all about voice and were all about a quick call and then jump back onto the fixed network as quick as you can. and built on an infrastructure that probably had about 1,000 base stations, whereas these days every mobile operator in the UK has at least 20,000 base stations. Then evolving through the mass adoption of voice communications, the growth of texting, and then this amazing evolution to the smartphone, the devices we have today, and really shifting from being something about voice to being all about data, and from, as I say, a sort of something of a luxury to an absolute dependency of everyday life. A recent Ofcom report, I think, concluded that of all the devices and all the tech that we may be willing to give up in our lives, the very last thing we would give up is our mobile phone, which is perhaps not too surprising, but it does really point to the degree to which this technology has transformed around us. And of course, it's therefore transformed the way we think about technology. This next chart, and apologies if you've seen this before, but I love this because it illustrates how fast not only technology changes, but we change. This is a picture, I always forget whether this is Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, in St. Peter's Square in 2005. And if you look carefully in the bottom right here, you'll see a little phone. You see some early tech warrior, an early adopter there with a phone. That's 2005. Look what the same picture from roughly the same place was a mere 8 years later. A complete change in the way in which we behave, in the way we have responded to the technology evolutions of the previous slide. And I couldn't find a slide for 2016, so I made one up. This, of course, is Pokemon Go, so it's excuse me for that. But I think we all know that, when we can convene in these sort of ways again, when we do get back to being able to convene in these ways, what people will be doing is streaming video. They'll be sharing in real time their experience. They'll be uploading to their social media accounts. And of course, those changes in behavior, which move from being nice to have to being things that everybody just expects to be able to do, ask profound questions of the infrastructure that companies like BT globally have to provide. So let's put some numbers on those sort of things with a few other little examples. This is some data from the 2017 Glastonbury music festival. Of course, those of you who are familiar with Glastonbury know it's a big festival and it's in a field. A big field, but it is nevertheless a field. A place that's not known necessarily for its built infrastructure or its communications infrastructure. And yet, look at the amount of data that this is traffic on the EE network for the period of the festival. Over 100 trillion bytes of data was transmitted. That was roughly double the previous concert. And I guess we know that when we can get back to doing these sort of things, the next one's going to be double or more that level. That's a vast amount of data. And for those of you who don't think in bytes, then let me bring it to life with a few other stats. It's about 100 million Instagram pics. And for those of you who are sort of nearer my age and don't think in Instagram pics, it would be about 23,000 of these good old things. DVDs, which if you stacked end on end would be a tall tower a tower taller than the Shard. It's a simply vast amount of data that essentially we have the challenge of delivering into what is essentially a field. That's the mobile network, but the fixed network is seeing a similar phenomena. Not quite 100% rate, but 50% compound annual growth has been roughly the growth we've seen on the fixed network for the past 15 years. Some years a bit higher, some years a bit lower, but pretty much solid 50%. If you punch 1.5 to the power 10 into your calculator, that tells you that in about 10 years' time, we need a network that's about 60 times bigger. So just reflect on that. After 180 odd years of building communications infrastructure, the growth in services and demand that we're facing means that in a decade's time, the network needs to be able to deal with traffic, which conservatively, if it just carries on doing what it's doing, needs to be 60 times bigger. And of course, we only need a big breakthrough, some amazing innovation that suddenly drives traffic more to give it an even greater challenge. And I'll just reflect on what that means from a network perspective. This next stat is a bit of a silly one, but bear with me. It really reflects on trying to bring to life what a growth rate like that means. In a network, you obviously have to dimension to the peak. You can't dimension to the average, so you need to be able to deal with the peak traffic. Otherwise, half the people are annoyed, all the time. Now, doors similarly grow. One of our major academic partners is Cambridge, and every time I go there, I note how low the doors are in those lovely old colleges. And that's because, of course, humans have grown over the last few hundred years. But if humans grew at the rate that our traffic grows, then doors would need to be about 15 meters tall by 2025 to avoid us all clattering our head every time we walk through them. That just puts in perspective the rate of growth that we're faced with. Now, of course, that's demand. Revenues are not growing anything like that. If anything, revenues in global telecoms are flat to declining. So this is a huge challenge. How do we respond to it? The answer is we respond through the science, the engineering, and the technology that you're going to hear about later on in this session, and the innovations you're going to hear about during the rest of this conference during the week. And it's that fusion of science with engineering that allows us to deal with these sort of demands in an elegant way. And if we look forward to the next decade, then actually I think we're going to see even more exciting applications, even more demand, but even more innovative and creative responses. These charts try to sort of capture the way in which we see communications evolving over the next 5 to 10 years. And I'll give you a few little examples of this, of work we're doing right now in just a moment. But this is harnessing developments in photonics that you're going to hear about later, developments in wireless technology, developments in some quantum technologies, developments in AI and computer science, and developments which essentially are going to allow us to have an ultra-connected world where it's not just ourselves, but it's the billions of so-called Internet of Things devices that we will be connecting. What's the point of doing that? Well, because that will allow us to harvest information and data, and that data, powered by AI and machine learning, will allow us to make better decisions. Essentially, insight about stuff will become the value commodity within communications. And the potential that offers is to just help us with many and many of the challenges we face in society. So challenges to do with pollution, challenges to do with the environmental impact of what we do, challenges to do with economic productivity. So you can see on this chart, and these are all things that BT is actively researching with our academic partners and with other technology companies, things like smart, agri-tech, smart application of smart technologies to agriculture, very important, environmental and a necessity, of course, for life. How we transport things around, so smart transport, how our entire cities run through smart city applications, how we keep ourselves safe and secure, and how we create and consume and distribute our energy. There is a huge range of applications, but the important message I want to land here is this is all built on a bedrock of the physical sciences that underpin those areas that you'll be hearing about in the Tommy Flowers network as we go through. I want to give you a couple of examples, very recent examples, and some of my BT colleagues will be familiar with this one in particular, because we've been talking about it for the past 6 months or so. This is an application of technology called 5G. You'll be familiar with the fact we launched 5G the middle of last year and are now rolling it out across the nation. And this is just one of the myriad use cases that we're envisaging for 5G. What does 5G give us? Well, advances in coding technology, advances in the way we encode information onto those wireless signals gives us more bandwidth, advances in the antenna technology, and indeed changes to the frequencies we use, the physical properties they have give us different characteristics that allow us to give better coverage. Changes in the architecture allow us to think about ultra reliability in our mobile communications, and that opens up a whole range of new services. The architecture of 5G gives us a lower latency, lower delay across the network, and again, that opens up a whole range of new applications. And this is one particular use case that we've been working on jointly with King's University in London, Ericsson, one of the big mobile technology providers, and with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. And it's a beautifully simple use case that has some profound implications. It's all about remote expertise. So it's about beaming in the consultant. That chap you see on the right-hand side there is a consultant in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital wearing a virtual reality headset. You can see the little graphic to the top right. He can see in superb quality video and audio. He can see what's happening in the back of that ambulance over on the left-hand side. We've got augmented reality in there, so you can see real-time data and telemetry that's coming off the poor old patient who's lying in the ambulance. That's what the consultant can experience. You'll also notice the paramedic has got a glove on, and that's not because his hands are cold. That's something called a haptic glove, and there is a haptic communication channel as part of this, which is exploiting the ultra reliability and low latency. And it allows the clinician in the hospital to actually feel and control what's going on in the ambulance. And in this particular use case, there's an ultrasound scan happening. So the goal here is essentially for the paramedic and the consultant to work together to decide what's the next best step. This is insight as a service, if you like, allowing the next choice as to what the pathway of care for that patient should be. It's a beautifully simple application. The clinicians, I mean, we've been learning huge amounts from this at BT, and the clinicians are now thinking of myriad other use cases where they could adopt this sort of technology. But just think for a moment about the benefit to society for this. There's an obvious benefit that the patient gets dealt with better. That's the main and first order benefit. But if that then results in them being taken home, perhaps, rather than being taken to the hospital to then spend time in the hospital to then be taken home, there's an immediate efficiency in terms of the use of the precious resource of the ambulance, the assets and resource in the hospital. There's less people there. There's less stuff going on. So those resources are not under so much pressure. There's less pollution as journeys that don't need to happen are not happening. So this tiny little example of one application of 5G, when you think about it and write it across the whole of society and industry, providing insight to make the next best choice, actually, you can start seeing some profound implications. And this is all built on those advances in wireless and optics communications. So it's a lovely use case and one that we're very excited to be working on with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. This is sort of completely different, but equally exciting. This is a research program that we've just kicked off with a range of partners. Bristol University, a load of the creative media boutique specialist companies that exist in the Bristol region, a dance school, a nationally famous dance school. And this is again about a 5G application. So this is actually now thinking about the future of immersive visual and audio communication, thinking the future about what we're doing here. And it's thinking about how, really from glass to glass, right from the video capture moment, where the cameras capture video content, right the way through to capture, encoding, transmission, delivery, and then presentation to an end user. And thinking about not only the technical challenges associated with that, but the physiological challenges associated with that. How do you actually do all that so the experience that you're experiencing in that virtual reality doesn't give you seasickness, doesn't make you feel rubbish? You know, how does it land as a really compelling thing? The research questions here are really interesting because, I'll mention some of the things they're trying to do first of all. If you look at the little pictures there, on the bottom left, if you look closely, you can see a boxing match is going on. And what the people sitting on that sofa are enjoying, and you look on their coffee table, they've got a little 3D representation of the boxers. And actually, if they chose to, they could get up and walk around that. So this is trying to be able to project 3D images that you can literally walk around and experience. And that's in an entertainment context, but clearly that could be in a business context. It could be in a learning context. And indeed, the top right graphic is going to explore just that. It's thinking about how would you do dance lessons remotely? How could you do that in an immersive and effective way? The technical questions we're looking at here go right through from how do you capture the stuff? How do you capture in glorious 8K, full immersive experience? If you miss bits, how do you use AI and machine learning to infill the bits of content you've missed? If you do that, you need a lot of processing. Where does the processing sit? Processing could sit on the headset, but that makes headsets a bit more expensive, a bit more cumbersome. So it could sit somewhere else. Well, deep in the cloud, it could sit in the cloud. But of course, then you've got the speed of light, which places some latency limits on, delay limits on things. So do you put it in between? Do you put it at the edge of the network? And if you put it at the edge, well, where is the edge? Is it the base station? Is it, one of our 100 metro nodes here in the UK? So there's some really interesting questions which have a broad range of variables that you need to think about. You need to think about performance, the physiology of humans, economics. There's some profound questions around how we would deliver these amazing experiences using 5G, mobile edge computing technology. Really excited about this project, and that's something that we're doing right now. I want to pivot very quickly. I've only got 2 more slides. I'm going to talk about photonics. I touched on it earlier, and I waved around these hair-thin strands of glass, which I told you were sort of invented. I think the paper was 1965-66, Kao and Hockham, and which have really been the bedrock of our communications networks since that first deployment in 1984, and have been underpinning all our networks ever since then. The 19th and 20th century saw this massive build out of infrastructure, didn't it? They saw railways, they saw electricity, water, and telephone networks based on copper for that final link. Where we're at right now is completing the job and taking fiber that last final step right the way to premises, to buildings, and as we build out our mobile networks to many other places as well, to small cell architectures, increasingly small radio heads, which will need fiber backbone. This is a massive engineering task, and it took a century to do the copper thing. We're hoping to do it a lot quicker than that. The OpenReach division of BT tell me that and tell us all that we're hoping to be past 20 million premises here in the UK alone, which is about 2/3 of premises, not by the middle of the decade, but by the not by the middle of the century, but by the middle of this decade, by sort of 2025 or so. So a major activity. This is going to be worldwide. This is going to be hundreds of billions of pounds invested. And this infrastructure will be the infrastructure for the next 100 years. This will need to endure. So it's vital that research right now is forward-gazing and thinking about the many challenges that infrastructure may have to face. So not just thinking about what it's got to do in the first 10 years of its life, but what's it got to do in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years of its life. Those are some of the challenges, and those are some of the things you'll hear about from the other speakers today. And this stuff is super important because it will underpin our 5G networks. It'll underpin our 5G plus networks. Whatever the evolution of 5G is, it will be riding this stuff, single mode optical fiber. It will therefore be the heart of our consumer and business internet, and will be the essential infrastructure for IoT and for smart cities. So it's well worth listening on to the presentations that come after this, which will catch you up on the exciting work that BT is doing and the exciting work that's happening in leading universities and with leading global vendors here in the UK. I'll touch on this one as a sort of a second to last slide. Because this is mainly because this is very, very, very timely. We put out a press release last week, which talked about a customer trial that we launched 2 weeks ago, which was looking at one of the attributes which really is going to have to be essential for all of the things I've described to be viable and to come to pass, and that is the security of our modern connected digital world. And one of the techniques that we'll be using to use that goes right back to quantum physics. It goes back to something called quantum key distribution. Now, later in the week, there is an entire session dedicated to advances in quantum communications and quantum technology. And that's a very broad gamut. That covers things like quantum computing, which many of you will have read and heard about. And they are things that are going to emerge over the next few years, which will allow us to do a complex computational task that computers that we have today would take hundreds of thousands of years, if not longer, to do. So that's a very exciting breakthrough. But there's also other dimensions which are less well known, such as quantum timing. The hope that we can increase the resolution of our timing by 1, 2, maybe 3 orders of magnitude. That has a profound potential set of opportunities for telecommunications. For those of you listening who are familiar and work with our mobile network, it's a cellular network. Well, if we had timing like that, you could probably do away with the cells. You could change the architectures completely to many, many benefits. Another presentation, another day. But quantum timing is a really exciting thing. Quantum sensors are things that will allow us to do things like look under the ground. Advances in medical imaging, but for us, it'd be really convenient if we could look under the ground and see the built infrastructure that we have to run and maintain and operate for the nation. So some really exciting technologies coming out of the application of quantum physics to the technologies that we have. Quantum key distribution is all about securing our networks. Now, our networks today are secure thanks to the algorithms that we use, the encryption algorithms, and quantum key distribution is a way of enhancing that technology, enhancing that security by transmitting those keys we need to unlock those encryption algorithms, by transporting them over our network as individual particles of light, encoding them on so-called photons. If we do that, that means we know if somebody eavesdrops. So the laws of quantum physics tell us that if somebody eavesdrops in on our network, we'll know about it. Why I'm excited about it right now, it's been a topic that's been being researched since, I think, 1984. BT did some early work with an ex-colleague in the labs in, I think, 1994. But 2 weeks ago, we started and announced our first commercial customer trial with the National Composite Centre down in Bristol. And this is bringing together that quantum channel with classical encryption to give an even more enhanced guarantee of the security of our network. So if you do get a chance, do listen in on Thursday to the quantum session. Last slide. What messages would I leave this conference with? Well, the first, I think, is that the pace of change will increase. It's never been this fast, and it'll never be this slow again. We need to get used to that, embrace it, and we all love a challenge, don't we? So that just means we need to focus harder on those challenges. As Fraser touched on, these are difficult times, very difficult times. But I guess, if there are silver linings, we are hearing about people wanting to build back better is one of the phrases we're hearing. And I guess it's inarguable, isn't it, that necessity is the mother of invention. And when times are strange like this, then the need and the appetite and the propensity to explore new things goes up. So I think we will see a real challenge on digital transformation, which is a real opportunity. How can we, as a communications industry, how can we harness and rally together all these different ingredients that we have, from AI to machine learning through communications, 5G, 4G, full fiber? How do we bring those together to help the nation, to help our customers, to help our citizens respond and find new ways of, educating, new ways of healthcare, new ways of doing things? I do think that is one of the things that we need and will, and I'm confident will, respond to. The application of AI to business problems and processes is a huge opportunity. The advances in computing, the physics of computing and AI have been extraordinary over the last 7 or 8 years. And it's not just in the end user applications. We tend to think of AI as sort of, Alexa, right? But AI is actually something we're applying deep in the infrastructure, deep in the photonic layer, deep in the radio layer. At the labs here at Martlesham, we're looking at how we can apply AI to the business of radio planning, to the way in which those 5G antennas actually work. Deep into the physics is where we're looking to apply some AI. So it's not just the really cool things we can think about in the more application layer. And my final message, I think, is probably the most important one. And this is particularly targeted on the cohort who the Tommy Flowers Network was really designed for, which is those PhD students and those postdoc students. The applied research, and I think in the medical circles it would be termed translational research, is the vital link. It's the vital link between discovery science and the economic and societal value that we're all seeking. That's what it is. And it's a multidisciplinary team game. I've had a really great career in many, many different roles, as you've seen, from field engineering through lab-based research through to corporate strategy director for BT. And the thing I've learned is, you don't know what you don't know. It's really obvious. And if you've got a brilliant idea that you think could solve a problem, then the thing you need to do is get with people who have the problem and know about the problem. But do it in a humble way. Do it in an engaging, humble way, because your curiosity about their problem will lead to the conversation that leads to you co-creating and co-innovating and finding solutions together. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital is a beautiful example of this. BT like to think they know a bit about photonics and AI and 5G and 4G and communications and all that stuff. Clinical setting of a hospital, not so much. How you run an ambulance service, not so much. Bringing those communities together with a common goal of how can we make things better is incredibly powerful. That's what applied research is, and that's really what the Tommy Flowers Network is all about. It's convening audiences like this who wouldn't normally come across each other to have a dialogue and spark an idea around how we can harness these amazing technologies to make our world a little bit better. Thanks ever so much for listening. I'll stop there, and I think I'm handing back to Mike.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are, Tim. Thank you. Right. Tim, thank you. Once again, as inspiring and as entertaining as ever. People, if you want to ask a question of Tim, if you could actually drop it into the Q&A panel on WebEx, and then we'll try to get to as many as we can. Although you can probably appreciate, we'll probably get more questions we have for time. But in the interim, Tim, while we're waiting for these to come in, I have a couple of questions for you. So, first one's about capacity. I mean, I used to get 5 megabits at home. I now get 150 megabits at home. I'm using that. How are we going to keep up with this? Because it just doesn't seem to be no end to it, whether it's corporate or people.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. Right? I mean, I've just sort of keep ducking it, frankly, because it's it's hotly debated. There's lots of opinion, but I mean, there is no real science, I don't think, around how much capacity people need. But you're right, there has been an inexorable growth, and I mean, the good news is, particularly when you think about the core network capacity, and actually, I mean, the people who should be answering this question are the people who are going to be speaking next in this session, because as we eyed, if you go back, I guess 7 or 8 years, and you eyed that growth, that 50% compound annual growth, and you looked at the core networks, I think you would have thought there was a real issue here, right? You'd have thought, actually, this is going to get quite uncomfortable, because the photonic systems, the optical fiber systems we were using back then, were the things we've been using since the days I was in the lab, right? So-called IMDD, intensity modulated direct detection, which is a fancy way of saying turning a laser on and off very quickly and increasingly quickly. And we could see that running to an end, right? That game was coming to an end. The innovation that the photonics community came up with was actually to go back to some research which was explored when I was in the labs back in the 80s and eliminated because it didn't work very well, which was coherent communications. And what that gave is a real burst of life to the capacity of our core optical communication system. So basically, it's a really never say never, I think the lesson there is. And actually our core networks now, and they're all coherent-based systems. The sort of the techniques that anybody who's got a radio background will be familiar with are being used to modulate the lasers which carry all that traffic. And if you future gaze and you look at some of the things that are being looked at, and may well be some of the things that Neil and Andrew touch on, if you look at that, we've got tricks up our sleeve which make me pretty confident that actually we can deal with that growth. And even if there are some big spikes in capacity, core optical networks, I think we're good to go. I think we are good to go. So, the succinct answer to your question, Mike, is physics, right? The continual application of physics and real-world engineering. Because, by the way, the thing that made that possible was electronics. It was the advances in digital signal processing and good old Moore's law, and the speed of electronics, in a way, came to the savior of photonics. And it's the fusion of those that's actually allowed us to produce those. So I think we're okay for a little while.
Okay. Well, I've had kind of an adjacent question here from Ryan Hill and John Borowski. I'm assuming I've pronounced that right. It's kind of a similar kind of question. So Ryan goes on about, he's heard of the Shannon limit for the upper limit of information transfer. And, is this ever going to be an issue for OpenReach fiber network, or will we encounter other hardware software limits first?
Yeah, well, Shannon sits there as the sort of the information theory limit, and whether that's a mobile network or whatever the network is, right? Whatever the medium, whether you're using electromagnetic waves in free space, which are called radio waves, of course, whether you're using electromagnetic waves propagating in glass or in free space, and I think Neil Parkin might talk about hollow core fiber, I don't know, or whether you're talking about the transmission stuff we stick on copper cables. that's an information theory limit. So that kind of sits there, and short of some amazing mega breakthrough, that will be there. So the challenge is more how, without violating that, can you get more and more capacity into the infrastructure? And if you focus in on the access network there, which is the passive optical network, again, it's a great question, and it's one we do worry about, and it's one that in the labs we've got a series of answers to, and they're, again, never say never, but I think it's all about creating options that you can, in a techno-economically viable way, deploy. Because what you don't want to do is deploy, other than in the glass itself, right? Because when we put the glass in, we don't want to be doing that again, right? I mean, the OpenReach are passing some phenomenal number of premises. I always forget, because every time I hear Clive Selley talk about it, it goes up. It's something like 20 or 30,000 premises a week, right? So an amazing rate of essentially getting glass to premises. Now, that is a job that you want to do as fewer times as possible, because it's civil engineering, it's hard yards. What you put on either end is a bit more flexible, not completely flexible, because bits of kit in people's home cost money. People have got to be happy for them to be there. So you haven't got complete flexibility, but it's a heck of a lot easier to upgrade those things. And the world of global telecommunications and the world of standards, which of course is something that BT and other companies on this conference influence heavily, is all about charting that roadmap that says, well, if capacity goes like this, what do we do? And I think there again, certainly for the next 15 to 20 years, I think we're pretty confident. We've got a range of options. If you go to optics conferences, there'll be vociferous and enthusiastic debate around exactly what the right choices are. But the important point is there are choices. There are options there to do with combinations of different wavelengths. I mentioned coherent communications, this moving away from turning lasers on and off. I think one of the big opportunities for the access arena is, can we get coherent communications into the access arena? That gives us huge amounts of capacity. The issue is economics, right? Because the engineering of a coherent receiver is just a heck of a lot more expensive than the engineering of a laser that's just got to tell whether the light is on or off. So you get this lovely mix of not just the physics and the engineering and the art of the possible, but you get the art of the techno-economically viable. If it's £1,000 for a receiver, well, you know what? That's really not going to work if I'm trying to provide a product that retails at about £15 to £20 a month. It just doesn't work. So there's that engineering bit of my triangle. The physics is beautiful. That engineering bit's really hard, because it is about reliability, cost point, and getting everything. It's getting all those ducks to line up, which have to line up in order for us to be able to have ways forward. So I think the answer is no, we're not going to run out of capacity. But there are a lot of detailed engineering questions that we and the global ecosystem of telcos and vendors are working through. And you know what? There's some new tech coming around, and I think Alistair Pausty, who's going to be talking later, is one of those really exciting smaller companies who've just got some really great ideas that could change the world. So that's the beauty of this space, isn't it? Always got to be looking for innovation and new ways to solve those real world problems.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tim. We've probably got room for one more question. And I've had one come in from, and I hope I pronounced this right, Sherelle Dunbar-Dow. So, the data we enable, the more we consume and the more we store. Are BT involved in any research to help reduce the costs and space needs of physical data storage and to make it more sustainable?
We are actually, and it's a really, really important point. I forget the absolute number, but BT as in the UK represents a couple of % of our overall energy consumption as a nation, right? So it's one of those things we've always had as part of that design criteria. If you think about your broadband, there's been low power modes for years. If it's not doing anything, can you let it fall back to a lower power mode? So it's always been there. But I think what's happened over the last few years is, of course, as we and the rest of the planet have woken up to the real challenge associated with energy. I think it's moving from being, a variable to being a really, 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 really important variable, and one where I do think, this is where deep physics is going to help, isn't it? This is where we need to go right back to basics in the electronics we use, the actual fundamental chippery that we use, be it electronics or photonics, and think, in a profound way, is there a way, what's the energy usage of this? So a lot of, there's work going on right now in my lab, which is asking those sort of questions. What's the energy per bit that we are consuming, and what can we do about it? Pleasingly, BT's been doing a lot. A lot of telcos around the world have been focused on this, but I think there's a pretty decent record over the past 10 years, actually, of BT taking its energy, its actual energy usage down, but we just need to do more. So it's very much an active research area, and it's very much an active research area within the ecosystem of universities here in the UK, both in terms of minimizing usage, but also in terms of generation. So, BT is investing the UK is investing very heavily in its R&D, its national R&D in renewable energy, be that sort of offshore wind type stuff, or be it battery technologies, thinking about the revolution that we need to have in transport and all areas of our economy. The UK government, in terms of their choices around how they spend the 10 billion or so that goes into the research councils and then off into the universities, a big focus is on energy and reducing it, and telecommunications is absolutely part of that. So it's a great question.
Great. Thank you very much, Tim. On that note, I'll bring this session to a close. Tim, thank you very much. As always, very insightful, very entertaining, also very passionate, which I think is the words I'm seeing in some of the feedback already. So thank you very much for that.
If over into deranged, then I'll take it.
Fair enough. Great. Thank you.
Everybody. Cheers.
Great. Thank you, Tim.